Change your mind, change your path. The Art of Ongoing Reinvention. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. Narrated by Roman Cross. That's one of the biggest myths out there, that transformation only happens after collapse. That you have to be lost, broken, or dramatically off course before you're allowed to start again. But what if reinvention could begin earlier? Quieter? In the middle of a regular Tuesday afternoon? This book isn't about tearing down your life. It's about questioning the thoughts steering it. Because reinvention doesn't begin with what you do. It begins with what you think. And often, the most defining turns in our lives aren't marked by external shifts, but by internal ones, the moment you decide to stop believing a lie you've carried for years. The moment you choose curiosity over certainty. The moment you say, maybe I'm not who I thought I had to be. If you're reading this, you're probably already sensing it. Something needs to shift. It might be subtle. It might not even have a name yet. But some part of you knows that the current version of your life, and maybe your mindset, is too small for who you're becoming. That's not a flaw. That's the signal. In the pages ahead, we'll explore the art of ongoing reinvention. Not as a dramatic, one-time act, but as a lifelong process of small, intentional shifts. We'll talk about the thought loops that keep you stuck, the hidden scripts that drive your behavior, and the everyday moments where power quietly returns to you. As Les Brown once said, you cannot expect to achieve new goals or move beyond your present circumstances unless you change. But he didn't mean change who you are. He meant change how you think about who you are. That's where every new path begins, with a shift in perspective. So if you've ever felt like your life is on autopilot, if your habits feel inherited instead of chosen, or if you've outgrown the story you've been telling yourself, welcome. You're not starting over. You're starting again with more wisdom, more clarity, and more say in where you're headed next. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Rudder in Your Mind. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Aaron realized he hadn't made a decision for himself in nearly 4 years. He was in the grocery store, standing in front of a shelf of pasta sauce, frozen by indecision. Not because the choices were overwhelming, but because he suddenly couldn't remember the last time he chose something without deferring to someone else's preference, his boss, his spouse, a podcast guru. He put the jar back, left the store, and sat in his car with the engine off, staring out the windshield. The question came uninvited but unmistakably. What if I've been letting everyone else steer my life but me? We've all been there, though the setting may differ. For some, it's a career that no longer fits but still wears like a uniform. For others, it's a version of themselves they outgrew years ago but still feel obligated to perform. And the mistake many of us make is assuming the way out requires a grand, sweeping reinvention. Quit the job, sell the house, move across the world. But what if the path could shift more subtly, more sustainably? Think of your life as a river. It flows. It bends. Sometimes it speeds up or slows down depending on the terrain. And you're the boat, the vessel. But what determines where you go? That's the rudder. That's your mind. The thoughts you think, the beliefs you hold, the patterns you unconsciously repeat. They steer everything. Most of us never question the direction we're headed because we mistake movement for choice. But unless you're actively guiding the rudder, you're drifting. Here's what most people don't realize. Reinvention isn't about becoming someone else. It's about reclaiming the role of pilot. It begins the moment you pause and ask, where am I heading, and why? It's that moment in the car, in the store aisle, in the quiet hours when your autopilot glitches just long enough for truth to slip through. The first step to changing your path isn't motion, it's awareness. It's recognizing that your current circumstances, while complex, are partly shaped by accumulated thoughts. Not all of them are true. Some were inherited. Others are outdated. Many go unchallenged. But if you can think a thought, you can rethink it. And when you do, you begin the slow, deliberate turning of the rudder. Aaron didn't change everything overnight. He didn't need to. What he did instead was begin paying attention. He noticed how often he said yes when he meant maybe. How often he blamed time when fear was the real culprit. He began writing down thoughts that repeated in his head. You always give up. You're not cut out for this. And asking says who. Not to fight them, but to examine them. To stop treating them as facts and start seeing them as choices. And that's where your journey begins too. You don't have to know the final destination. You don't have to chart the entire river. You just have to be willing to take hold of the rudder. Because when you change the way you think, even slightly, you create the possibility of new paths, unseen outcomes, and a version of yourself you haven't yet met. You've already begun. You're reading this. You're questioning. That means your hand is reaching for the wheel. And once you touch it, you're no longer drifting. You're directing. Your mind is the rudder that steers the path of your life. Small shifts in thinking can lead to major changes in direction. Reinvention starts with awareness, not drastic action. Where in your life are you drifting instead of directing? Write down 3 recurring thoughts that shape your daily behavior. Ask, are these helping steer me where I want to go? Chapter 2. The Illusion of a Fixed Self. Camila always thought of herself as the reliable one. The one who didn't rock the boat, who did what was expected, who finished what she started, even if what she started no longer made sense. When she got promoted into a leadership role at her company, she hesitated. Not because she lacked the skills, but because she didn't see herself as a leader. That label, that identity, didn't fit the box she'd lived in for years. I'm not that kind of person, she told her mentor. He raised an eyebrow and asked, what kind of person do you think you are, and who decided that? It's a powerful question. Most of us walk around carrying a self-description we rarely investigate. I'm shy. I'm not creative. I always procrastinate. These statements feel like facts, like the ink in our DNA. But more often, they're inherited or absorbed. Maybe you were labeled the quiet one as a child. Maybe someone laughed at your drawing in 4th grade and you stopped calling yourself artistic. Maybe failure became part of your story because it happened once and you kept repeating the narrative. Here's the truth, your identity is more malleable than you think. Who you are is not a static thing carved in stone. It's a living pattern shaped by repeated thoughts and reinforced behaviors. Identity is not a cage, it's a current, and currents can be redirected. We crave consistency, even in our suffering. There's a strange comfort in believing we are who we've always been. It feels safe, familiar. But safe doesn't equal true. Just because you've believed something for a long time doesn't make it right. It just makes it practiced. The longer a belief goes unchallenged, the more natural it feels, like a path worn smooth by repetition. Camila's turning point came not from a dramatic shift, but from a small experiment. She decided to act like a leader for 1 week. That's it. No commitment to be someone new forever, just a temporary trial. She spoke up in meetings. She shared ideas before they were fully polished. She coached a junior teammate through a problem. And at the end of the week, she realized something. Acting like a leader didn't feel like pretending. It felt like remembering. This is often the case. Reinvention doesn't always mean creating a new self. Sometimes it means uncovering the parts of you that have been hidden, shamed, or simply ignored. What you call your true self isn't a singular fixed identity, it's a spectrum of possibilities. And every time you choose a new behavior or challenge an old assumption, you shift slightly along that spectrum. The danger of the fixed self story is that it locks you out of your own evolution. It convinces you that change is betrayal instead of growth. But here's the thing, every version of you has an expiration date. Not because you're broken, but because you're human. Trees shed leaves. Snakes shed skin. People shed selves. That's not a crisis, it's a cycle. Camila didn't become a new person. She became more of herself by releasing an outdated version. And that's available to you too. The identity you've been carrying isn't the full story. It's a draft. You get to revise. Your identity is shaped by repeated thoughts, not fixed traits. Who you are can evolve as you examine and challenge old self-labels. Reinvention often means remembering forgotten parts of yourself. What story about yourself have you accepted as fact, but never questioned? Choose one identity label you've carried I'm not good at. Challenge it by taking one small action that contradicts it today. Chapter 3. Your brain is wired for reinvention. When Maya's therapist told her that her brain could actually change, she laughed. Not a joyful laugh, a cynical, guarded one. "You don't know how many times I've tried to change," she said. "This is just how I am." But her therapist wasn't offering false hope. She was referencing something Maya had never been taught, the science of neuroplasticity. The human brain, it turns out, is not a static machine. It's more like a garden, constantly growing, pruning, rewiring itself in response to what we feed it, focus on, and practice. For most of our lives, we were taught a different model, the fixed brain. That by adulthood, our mental wiring was set in stone, and from then on we just tried to manage it. But neuroscience now tells us otherwise. The brain is adaptable, not just in youth, but well into adulthood. This adaptability, called neuroplasticity, means you are biologically capable of change at the most fundamental level. Your thoughts shape your brain. Your brain, in turn, shapes your behavior. And your behavior reinforces your thoughts. It's a feedback loop, but it can be interrupted and redirected. The trick is that the brain doesn't care whether a thought is helpful or harmful. It simply builds what you repeat. If you constantly think "I'm not enough," your brain will strengthen that pathway, making it easier to believe next time. If you replace that with "I'm learning as I go," and you repeat it often enough, the brain eventually builds that track instead. You're not lying to yourself, you're rewiring yourself. This is not wishful thinking. It's physiology. Maya's first assignment was simple but uncomfortable. Each time she caught herself thinking, "I can't handle this," she paused and said out loud, "I'm handling it now." Not to fake confidence, but to break the loop. At first it felt ridiculous, but within 2 weeks, something shifted. She wasn't calm all the time, but the storm didn't swallow her the way it used to. Her brain was beginning to trust a new signal. That signal was, "I am capable of adapting." Reinvention often begins with a choice to starve one thought and feed another. Think of your brain like a forest trail. The more you walk a path, the clearer it becomes. The less you walk it, the more overgrown it gets. Most of us have spent decades walking certain mental trails: doubt, shame, fear, criticism. They're well worn, easy to find, but just because they're familiar doesn't mean they're right. If you want a new destination, you need a new trail. And the good news is, your brain is equipped to build it. This doesn't mean change is instant. Rewiring the brain takes consistency, not intensity. A single thought repeated once changes nothing. But repeated daily? That's a different story. The process is slow, subtle, and invisible, until it isn't. One day you respond instead of react. You pause instead of spiral. You offer yourself compassion where you once defaulted to critique. These are signs your internal wiring is shifting. Maya didn't become someone else. She became someone whose brain trusted a different story. And that story wasn't "I'm perfect" or "I've arrived." It was simply "I can choose a better thought." That's how real reinvention begins, not with a dramatic overhaul, but with a single rewired loop. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Your brain is not fixed. It rewires based on repeated thoughts and behaviors. You can weaken old patterns and strengthen new ones through intentional repetition. Reinvention is supported by neuroscience, not just mindset. What recurring thought might be shaping your path without your permission? Pick one limiting thought you repeat often. Replace it with an empowering alternative and say it out loud once a day for the next 7 days. Chapter 4. Detecting Thought Loops. Eli always assumed his anxiety came from the outside, the deadlines, the bills, the constant stream of notifications that never seemed to stop. But one morning, stuck in traffic on a road he took every day, he noticed something strange. His jaw was clenched, his chest was tight, and nothing had happened yet. No missed call, no angry email, just silence and idle time. That's when it hit him. His anxiety wasn't reacting to reality. It was reacting to a thought. One he didn't even realize he was thinking. I'm falling behind. Most people live with a loop playing quietly in the background of their mind. It repeats itself like a song stuck on a broken record. You might not hear it clearly at first, but it sets the tone. For some, it's I'm not doing enough. For others, I always screw things up. These loops are powerful not because they're true, but because they're automatic. You don't choose them. They just show up. And because they've been there so long, they feel like part of you. The problem is, unchecked thought loops don't just affect how you feel. They affect how you live. They determine which risks you avoid, which people you trust, which dreams you defer. Your brain seeks evidence to support whatever loop it's playing. If the loop says you're unworthy, you'll overlook compliments and fixate on criticism. If the loop says you're stuck, you'll ignore possibilities and only see dead ends. It becomes a filter through which your entire reality is interpreted. Eli started paying attention. He kept a small notepad in his pocket, and every time he felt his chest tighten or his energy dip, he wrote down whatever he was thinking. At first, it was hard to catch. The thoughts moved fast, slippery as fish. But over time, patterns emerged. The same phrases kept popping up. You're behind. You're not working hard enough. They're all ahead of you. No one had to say these things out loud. He'd internalized them so deeply that his brain repeated them without asking permission. Once he could see the loop, he could interrupt it, not by fighting it, but by noticing it. Observation is one of the most underrated tools for transformation. When you observe a thought, instead of identifying with it, you create space. And in that space, you regain choice. You can question the thought. You can replace it. Or you can simply let it pass without grabbing onto it. Most thought loops come from somewhere. A comment made by a parent years ago. A failure that turned into a fear. A cultural message absorbed without consent. But where it came from is less important than what it's doing to you now. Is it helping you grow, or is it holding you hostage? That's the real test. If a thought keeps showing up and dragging you in circles, it's time to pull the thread. Unravel it. Examine it. Don't ask, is this true? Ask, is this useful? Eli didn't stop his thoughts from happening. No one can. But he stopped letting them steer. And slowly, the loop began to quiet. Not because he silenced it with force, but because he stopped feeding it attention. That's the shift. Awareness changes everything. When you know the loop, you're no longer inside it. You're outside, watching it spin. And from there you can choose a different direction. Thought loops are unconscious beliefs that shape your perception and behavior. You can disrupt loops by observing and identifying repeating mental patterns. Awareness breaks the automatic cycle and opens space for choice. What thought keeps repeating in your mind, even when no one else is saying it? For one day, write down any repeating thoughts that trigger stress or self-doubt. Review them at night and ask, do I want this thought steering my direction? Chapter 5. Small Shifts, Big Turns. Jasmine didn't think she was doing anything special. She just started setting her alarm 15 minutes earlier. That small change gave her time to sit quietly with a cup of coffee before her kids woke up. She wasn't meditating or journaling or listening to motivational podcasts. She was just giving herself space to breathe. After a few weeks, her mornings felt different, less frantic, more intentional. She began responding instead of reacting. And soon, that tiny window of calm rippled into the rest of her day. Her coworkers noticed. Her tone softened. Her decisions became clearer. Nothing radical had changed, just the way she started her morning. But somehow, everything else shifted with it. We often think reinvention requires dramatic gestures, a big announcement, a sudden leap, a grand plan. But real, lasting change is rarely about intensity. It's about consistency. The small shift you repeat becomes the big turn you make. The power isn't in doing something huge once, it's in doing something meaningful often. That's how the brain rewires. That's how habits form. That's how identities evolve. The mistake we make is waiting for the perfect moment to start. We want clarity, energy, motivation, maybe even a sign. But waiting is its own loop. And the truth is, transformation doesn't wait for your mood to align. It begins the moment you decide to do one small thing differently. Something so small it almost feels silly. Like taking a walk before checking your phone, or replacing "I can't" with "I'm learning," or drinking water before coffee. It's not about the act itself, it's about claiming agency. Every time you choose differently, you remind your brain, "I'm not stuck. I'm steering." Jasmine's shift didn't seem impressive to anyone else. In fact, when she first told a friend about her new routine, the response was a polite nod. But here's the secret most people miss. Small changes don't just change your behavior. They change your story. Jasmine went from "I'm always behind" to "I create space for myself." And once that new narrative took root, it spread. She started making other small adjustments, setting boundaries at work, saying no without apology, making time for hobbies she'd forgotten. None of it was flashy, but all of it was transformative. Momentum doesn't start with motion. It starts with meaning. When you do something that feels aligned, even if it's small, it sends a signal to your nervous system, "We're safe to grow here." The body follows what the mind believes. If you believe you're too busy to change, you'll stay busy. If you believe you need a complete overhaul, you'll stay overwhelmed. But if you believe a small shift is enough to begin, you'll begin. And beginnings compound. Think of a plane changing direction by 1 degree. Over a few miles, the shift is barely noticeable. But stretch that flight path across an entire country, and the destination is completely different. Your mind works the same way. A tiny change in thinking, practiced daily, can land you in a life that looks nothing like the one you started in, not because you forced it, but because you chose it again and again. Jasmine didn't reinvent herself overnight. She still had messy days, but she trusted the process of small, steady shifts. And eventually, she looked up and realized she was no longer the same woman who raced through mornings on autopilot. She had turned, slowly, surely, into someone more grounded, more present, more herself. That's the art of reinvention. Not a leap, but a pivot. Not a blaze, but a steady burn. Consistent small changes create long-term transformation. The shift doesn't need to be dramatic to be powerful. Agency begins when you act on what you can control, however small. What small shift could you make this week that your future self would thank you for? Choose one routine to adjust by just 10%. Repeat it daily for the next 5 days and observe how it changes your mindset. Chapter 6. What if you're wrong? Darren had always been the smartest guy in the room. At least, that's what people told him, and what he started to believe. He prided himself on being right, on having answers, on never showing uncertainty. It made him feel safe, in control, but it also made him brittle. In meetings, he'd shut down suggestions that didn't match his thinking. At home, debates turned into arguments, and arguments turned into distance. One evening, his teenage daughter, frustrated and tearful, looked him in the eye and said, "You never listen. You just wait to be right." It landed harder than she knew. For the first time in years, Darren didn't feel powerful. He felt stuck. The need to be right is one of the most seductive traps the mind falls into. It offers security, predictability, and a sense of self-worth. But it also builds walls. When you assume your perspective is the only valid one, you stop listening. You stop learning. You stop growing. Reinvention can't happen in a closed system. It requires openness, not to chaos, but to the possibility that your current truth might not be the only truth. Asking "what if I'm wrong?" isn't weakness. It's a doorway. It doesn't mean you abandon your values or deny your experience. It means you're willing to hold your beliefs with a lighter grip, to entertain alternative views, to release the pressure of certainty and step into curiosity instead. That's where real change begins, not in knowing more, but in questioning deeper. Darren didn't change overnight, but something cracked open after that conversation with his daughter. He started noticing how often he entered interactions with his mind already made up. He caught himself interrupting, correcting, controlling, and he didn't like what he saw, so he tried something new. The next time someone disagreed with him, his colleague during a project review, he asked, "Can you walk me through your thinking?" Not as a challenge, but as a genuine question. The room shifted. The conversation deepened. And Darren realized that letting go of being right didn't make him smaller. It made him freer. Reinvention thrives in curiosity, and curiosity begins when you stop guarding your identity and start exploring it. What if the belief you've been defending isn't as solid as you think? What if your view of yourself, your past, your limits, what if it's only one version of the story? That doesn't mean everything you believe is wrong. It means there's more to discover. And discovery, not certainty, is the fuel of growth. The most powerful shifts often start with the smallest questions. Not how do I fix my whole life, but what belief have I never examined? Not what's the right answer, but what else might be true? These questions don't demand immediate answers. They just open the window. And once the window is open, new air flows in. Darren began writing down assumptions he caught himself making. This won't work. They don't respect me. I always mess up presentations. And beside each one, he wrote, "Is that a fact or a feeling?" That small act disrupted his autopilot. It gave him space to respond instead of defend. And over time, his world got bigger. Not because he added more knowledge, but because he made room for it. The most honest growth comes from humble questions. And perhaps the most liberating question of all is this: what if I've been wrong? And that's okay. Because if you've been wrong, that means there's still room to become someone new. And that's not loss, that's opportunity. The need to be right can block growth and connection. Asking "what if I'm wrong?" opens the door to reinvention and deeper understanding. Curiosity is more powerful than certainty in shaping a new path. What belief or assumption have you never questioned until now? Today, when someone disagrees with you, pause and ask, "Can you help me understand your point of view?" Just listen. No rebuttal. Chapter 7. Becoming the Observer. Amira sat quietly on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, her mind spinning with criticism. Why did I say that? I should have known better. I always mess things up. The thoughts came fast, cruel, and familiar. She'd learned to cope by overworking, over-apologizing, or just shutting down. But that night, something different happened. Instead of getting swept away, she heard a quiet inner whisper, "You're doing it again." That moment, small, barely perceptible, was the beginning of something profound. For the first time, Amira didn't drown in her thoughts. She noticed them, and in noticing them, she found space. Most of us live inside our minds without ever questioning the voice narrating our experience. It comments, critiques, warns, judges, and because it speaks in our own voice, we assume it must be true. But here's the twist: you are not your thoughts. You are the one who hears them. And once you realize that, everything changes. The distance between stimulus and response widens. The grip of old patterns loosens. That's the power of becoming the observer. Observing isn't the same as suppressing. It's not about silencing the mind or pretending everything's fine. It's about noticing what's happening without immediately reacting. When you observe a thought, you shift from being inside the emotion to seeing it from the outside. It's like stepping off the roller coaster and watching it loop from a safe distance. The ride still exists, but it doesn't control you. Amira started practicing this during her morning routines. Whenever a negative thought appeared, "You're falling behind, you're not good enough," she'd say, sometimes aloud, "Interesting." That one word was her reminder. This is a thought, not a command. And gradually, her thoughts lost their grip. Not because they stopped, but because she stopped believing all of them automatically. One of the most liberating shifts in reinvention is moving from identity to awareness. You don't have to label yourself as an anxious person or a failure just because those thoughts arise. You can witness them without attaching to them. That's where the transformation happens. You're not fighting your mind, you're simply watching it. And in the watching, you reclaim power. This practice is especially useful during emotional triggers. Someone says something sharp. You feel the heat rise in your chest. The familiar script begins, "They don't respect me. I need to defend myself." But if you've trained yourself to observe, you can pause and ask, "What's really happening here?" You don't suppress the emotion, you explore it. And in doing so, you make room for a wiser response. Amira didn't become immune to negative thinking. No one does. But she became skilled at catching it early. She learned to sit with discomfort without immediately reacting to it. That shift, subtle, quiet, internal, created a cascade of external changes. Her conversations became calmer. Her confidence grew. Her decisions felt less reactive and more rooted. And it all started with the choice to observe rather than obey her thoughts. You don't have to fix every thought to change your path. You just have to notice them. When you do, you give yourself options. You stop living on autopilot and start engaging with the present moment. That's not just mindfulness, it's empowerment. Because once you can observe your mind, you can steer it. You are not your thoughts, you are the observer of them. The observing creates space between trigger and reaction. Noticing without judgment is the first step towards self-directed change. When was the last time you believed a thought without questioning it? Today, when a negative thought appears, pause and say "interesting" instead of reacting. Then choose your response consciously. Chapter 8. Rewriting Mental Scripts. Logan didn't realize how often he was narrating his life until he finally started paying attention. He was walking into a networking event, something he already dreaded, and his mind was running a familiar monologue. "You're terrible at this. No one wants to talk to you. Just get through it and leave early." It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was casual, automatic, like background music he'd forgotten was playing. But for the first time, he heard it clearly. And in that moment, a simple but life-changing question occurred to him. Who gave me this script? We all carry scripts, repeated phrases, beliefs, and inner commentary that shape how we see ourselves and how we show up in the world. These scripts aren't necessarily chosen. They're absorbed, picked up from family, culture, school, early experiences. Maybe someone said you were too much or not enough. Maybe you failed once and the story became "I'm not cut out for this." Over time, these scripts move from occasional thoughts to default programming. They become the background operating system of your life. But scripts can be rewritten, and you don't have to wait for a breakdown or breakthrough to start editing them. All it takes is awareness, curiosity, and the willingness to speak to yourself differently. The key isn't just to silence the old narrative, it's to give your mind something better to say. Logan's experiment was simple. Before the next event, he wrote down a new script. You're here to connect, not impress. You don't need to win anyone over, just show up as you. He practiced reading it aloud a few times before leaving the house. It felt awkward at first, almost fake. But it was his voice, and it was his choice. At the event, the old script still whispered, but now it had competition. He found himself standing a little taller, making eye contact, asking questions. Nothing dramatic, just different. Different enough to notice. That's how rewriting works, not through grand declarations, but through repeated interruptions of the old story. Each time you catch the script mid-sentence and choose a new one, you reinforce a new pathway in the brain. Not once, again and again, until the new voice feels natural, familiar, true. This doesn't mean you adopt false positivity or pretend everything is fine. It means you become an intentional narrator. You ask, what story do I want guiding my choices today? And you practice saying it until it starts to sound like you. Because the truth is, it already is you. It's just the version of you that hasn't had a chance to speak up. Some scripts are louder than others. The ones that say you're not smart enough, lovable enough, disciplined enough. These usually have deeper roots. They might not vanish overnight. But even the deepest grooves can be reshaped. You don't need to erase the past, you just need to stop rehearsing it. The mind remembers what you repeat. So give it something worth remembering. Logan kept a list of new scripts on his phone. Things like progress over perfection, my voice matters, I belong in the room. Not because he always believed them, but because he wanted to. And belief, he learned, is often a result of repetition, not just evidence. Over time, those new lines became more than words. They became choices, and those choices became a new version of himself. You're already telling yourself a story. The question is, do you want to keep living by it? If not, you can edit it, starting today. Mental scripts are internal narratives we often absorb without question. Rewriting begins with awareness and intentional repetition. New scripts create new patterns, which lead to new outcomes. What's one script you've been repeating that no longer serves you? Write a new version of that script, one sentence, and read it aloud every morning this week. Chapter 9. The Myth of Arrival. Tasha had spent years chasing the finish line. First it was getting into the right college, then landing the right job, then finding the right relationship. Every milestone came with a temporary high, followed by an unexpected dip. No matter what she achieved, the sense of fulfillment she expected didn't last. I thought I'd feel different by now, she admitted to a friend after receiving a promotion she'd once dreamed of. That quiet sentence carried a truth most people live with, but rarely name. She had reached a goal, but she hadn't arrived. The myth of arrival is one of the most persistent illusions we carry. It tells us that once we achieve a certain thing, success, stability, recognition, healing, we'll finally feel whole. Finally be at peace. But life doesn't work that way. Reinvention isn't a one-time transformation followed by static perfection. It's an ongoing process of becoming. And every time we grow, the horizon shifts. The danger of believing in arrival is that it keeps you future-focused in a way that disconnects you from the present. You start treating today as a waiting room. You endure instead of engage. You delay joy, rest, and self-acceptance until you hit some arbitrary benchmark. But here's the truth. There is no final version of you. There's just the next version. And then the one after that. Tasha's turning point came not from quitting her job or moving to a new city, but from changing her posture toward growth. She stopped treating milestones as destinations and started seeing them as checkpoints. Progress, not completion. She began asking different questions. Not am I there yet? But am I aligned right now? That one shift rewrote her entire sense of momentum. She no longer felt behind. She felt in process. And that made all the difference. Ongoing reinvention asks you to release the fantasy that someday it will all be figured out. That your mind will no longer whisper doubts. That you'll never struggle with direction or self-trust again. Those things may lessen, evolve, soften, but they don't disappear. And they're not supposed to. They're part of the landscape. What changes is your relationship to them. You stop seeing doubt as failure and start seeing it as a signal. A nudge, a reminder to check in and realign. The myth of arrival also keeps you comparing. You look at others who seem further ahead and assume they've reached something you haven't. But everyone is mid-process. Everyone is carrying questions they haven't answered. The people who seem confident, they've just learned to live with the unfinished parts, to walk forward anyway. That's the quiet secret of reinvention. No one has it locked in. We're all sculpting as we go. Tasha started marking her growth in new ways, not by external achievements, but by internal shifts. The way she responded to setbacks, the risks she took, the compassion she offered herself on hard days. These weren't things she could post about or add to a resume, but they were real, measurable, transformational. And they signaled something she'd longed for, movement without self-punishment. You will never arrive in the way your old mindset imagined, but you can live in motion, in meaning, in alignment. You can recognize that the goal is not to reach some final, polished version of yourself. It's to keep becoming, to remain curious, open, and honest as the next version unfolds. Reinvention is not about reaching a final destination, it's an ongoing process. The belief in arrival delays fulfillment and disconnects you from the present. Growth is measured in alignment and internal shifts, not just external milestones. Where in your life are you waiting to arrive before allowing yourself to feel fulfilled? Identify one area where you've been postponing joy. Do one small thing this week to enjoy that area now, exactly as it is. Chapter 10. Sculpting from the Inside Out. Malik was known for being dependable, calm under pressure, always composed. On the outside, he looked solid, respected at work, kind to his friends, present for his family. But inside, he felt like a shadow of himself. He wasn't lost, exactly, just unfinished. Like he was living according to a blueprint someone else had drawn. One night, after helping everyone else get what they needed, he sat alone on his back porch and asked a question he'd avoided for years. What do I actually want? That question was the chisel. Reinvention is often portrayed as an external process, new job, new look, new environment. But real change starts deeper. It begins when you stop adding and start subtracting. Like a sculptor facing a block of marble, the goal isn't to create something entirely new. It's to reveal what was always within, hidden beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and expectation. The art is in the removal. Most of us are taught to build ourselves by accumulation, gather achievements, collect roles, stack on responsibilities and labels until they form an identity. But eventually, the weight becomes too much, and we confuse heaviness with wholeness. The truth is, clarity often comes not from adding more, but from releasing what no longer fits. Malik's turning point came not through some big epiphany, but through quiet edits to his daily life. He stopped overcommitting out of guilt. He started saying, "Let me get back to you," instead of reflexively saying yes. He paused each morning to ask, what version of me do I want to bring to this day? These weren't resolutions, they were removals. Slowly, he chipped away at the parts of himself that were performative, inherited, or fear-driven. What remained was something quieter, but more authentic. Sculpting from the inside out means you stop living for approval and start living from alignment. You no longer make decisions just to preserve an image. You make them to protect your peace. And as you strip away what's false or forced, what's true has room to breathe. You don't need to invent your purpose, you need to uncover it. This work requires honesty. You'll uncover patterns that once served you but now hold you back. Habits that kept you safe but also kept you small. You might grieve identities you've outgrown, even if they brought you praise. That's normal. Growth always involves loss. But not all loss is bad. Sometimes what you're losing is the noise that drowned out your own voice. Malik began noticing things he'd overlooked for years: the joy of building something slowly, the freedom of silence, the power of choice. He didn't abandon his responsibilities. He just stopped confusing them with his identity. He didn't need to blow up his life. He just needed to return to the parts of himself he'd buried beneath the performance of being put together. You don't have to start over to become someone new. You just have to start listening. Pay attention to what drains you. Notice what energizes you. Track which decisions feel like alignment and which feel like appeasement. The sculpture is already there. Your job is to uncover it. Reinvention isn't about becoming more. It's about becoming real. You carve out the noise, the pressure, the lies. And beneath all that, there you are. A real transformation begins by removing what's not aligned, not by adding more. Sculpting from the inside out reveals the truest version of you. Growth requires release of roles, habits, and identities that no longer serve you. What part of yourself have you been holding on to out of obligation, not alignment? Identify one task, role, or behavior you perform for approval. Pause it this week and notice what you feel in its absence. Chapter 11. Navigating Setbacks. For weeks, Nicole had been on a roll. Waking up earlier, setting clearer boundaries, thinking in more empowering ways. She felt in motion, finally. And then, one rough week. A project derailed. An argument with her partner. Old patterns flared up like old injuries. She snapped at a coworker, skipped her new morning routine, binge-watched shows late into the night. By Friday, she sat on the couch and whispered to herself, "I blew it." The momentum was gone. The progress felt fake. The voice in her head returned, cruel and certain. "See, you never really change." That moment is familiar to anyone who's ever tried to grow. Setbacks don't just test your progress, they test your belief in progress. And too often, we mistake them for proof that nothing's really changed. But the truth is, setbacks aren't the end of the path. They're part of it. They're feedback, not failure. Reinvention is not a straight line. It loops. It stutters. It regresses before it progresses. The key difference isn't whether you stumble, it's how you interpret the stumble. Do you see it as confirmation of your old story? Or do you treat it as a signal to realign? Because if you expect the road to be smooth, every bump feels like a crisis. But if you expect the bumps, you don't fear them, you learn from them. Nicole's old habit was all or nothing thinking. If she wasn't doing everything perfectly, she assumed she'd failed completely. But this time, something shifted. She pulled out a journal and wrote, "What's actually true right now?" That question slowed the spiral. She admitted she was tired, disappointed, discouraged. But she also noticed something new. She cared. That meant she was still in the game, still becoming, still worth the effort. Setbacks are often misunderstood because we over-identify with them. We think slipping up means starting over. But growth isn't a game you reset with each mistake. It's a trajectory, and setbacks, when acknowledged and examined, can even accelerate your progress. They reveal where the old wiring still holds power. They show you where more support, structure, or compassion is needed. They point to the places you haven't yet fully rewritten, and that's useful information. What Nicole realized was that falling back into an old pattern didn't erase her new ones. The fact that she noticed the slip, that she felt its weight, that she wanted to get back up, that was evidence of change. Old Nicole wouldn't have noticed, wouldn't have cared. That's the real measure of growth, not perfection, but awareness. Reinvention requires resilience, and resilience isn't about bouncing back immediately. It's about bouncing back eventually. It's about believing that today's detour doesn't cancel tomorrow's direction. Nicole gave herself one rule for setbacks: no judgment, just data. Instead of labeling the week as a failure, she treated it like a lesson. What triggered the unraveling? What support did she need next time? What boundaries had she quietly dropped? She didn't punish herself, she prepared herself. You don't have to be flawless to move forward. You just have to keep returning to your values, returning to your tools, returning to the version of you who believes change is still possible. Setbacks don't disqualify you, they refine you. They test the sturdiness of your new foundation. And each time you return, you lay that foundation a little deeper. Setbacks are part of growth, not proof against it. The way you interpret a stumble determines your trajectory. Awareness, not perfection, is the real marker of transformation. How do you typically respond to a setback, and what story does that reinforce? Think of a recent slip. Write down what it taught you, and one small way you can realign this week without judgment. Chapter 12. The conversation that never ends. It was a rainy afternoon when Jonah found himself standing in front of a bookstore display labeled New Year, New You. He smiled, but not because he planned to start over. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the pressure to reinvent his entire life by January 1st. Instead, he felt something quieter and deeper. He'd been changing all year, not with declarations or deadlines, but with steady, quiet decisions. The way he spoke to himself, the way he responded instead of reacted, the way he questioned old beliefs instead of bowing to them. He wasn't chasing a new version of himself. He was finally meeting the one who'd been there all along. Reinvention isn't a project you complete. It's not a destination you arrive at with a fanfare of certainty and clean resolutions. It's a conversation. Ongoing. Evolving. Sometimes messy. Sometimes miraculous. Always meaningful. It's the dialogue between who you've been, who you are, and who you're still becoming. And the moment you decide to stay in that conversation, to stay curious, to keep listening, you've already changed your path. There's freedom in knowing you don't have to get it all right at once. Growth doesn't follow a script. It meanders, doubles back, speeds up when you least expect it, and slows down when you wish it wouldn't. But it keeps moving, and so do you. The most powerful shifts often happen in the smallest moments, when you notice an old thought and choose not to follow it. When you pause before reacting. When you ask yourself, what would the wiser version of me do here? Jonah didn't overhaul his life in one dramatic gesture. He just kept showing up for the conversation. He caught his thought loops. He questioned his stories. He practiced being the observer, and every time he slipped, he returned, not perfectly, but faithfully. Reinvention, he learned, isn't about being a different person. It's about showing up as more of yourself, more often. The beauty of ongoing reinvention is that it gives you permission to grow without shame, to look back with compassion instead of regret, to look forward with curiosity instead of fear. It doesn't require you to erase your past, it invites you to integrate it. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every old identity becomes a layer you learned from. You're not starting from scratch, you're building on wisdom. The conversation doesn't end when you finish this book. In fact, this is just the beginning. From here, the path is yours to navigate. There will be new questions, new patterns to catch, new scripts to rewrite. But you're not starting blind. You've learned to steer. You've practiced presence. You've begun listening to the quiet voice beneath the noise, the one that says, there's more in you than you've let yourself believe. Jonah walked out of the bookstore without buying anything that day. Not because he didn't value growth, but because he finally understood he wasn't broken. He wasn't behind. He didn't need to become a new version of himself to be worthy. He just needed to keep listening, keep choosing, keep turning the rudder ever so slightly toward the life he wanted. And he would, not once, but again and again. So will you. Reinvention is a lifelong conversation, not a final destination. Small, steady shifts shape a path more powerfully than dramatic overhauls. You are always allowed to begin again, without shame, without delay. What part of your reinvention journey are you ready to recommit to right now? Write a one-sentence promise to your future self. Speak it aloud. Then take one small step in its direction today. Take care and be well.